Hey, this is Angela with this week's Living the Shift. Earlier this week on my radio show, I actually talked about getting through the muck, looking at the darkness to get to the light on our journey. And we had a great guest talking about that, about an individual journey and how looking at the darkness and really taking it by the reins and looking at it straight on, how it helped in terms of evolution, in terms of this person's individual development. And I talked a lot about the importance of being able to start looking at ourselves and what's in our past, what's in our lives, what's been in our other lifetimes and all of our experiences, how to start looking at that without judgment. That is really, really the key. And to do that, it's a shift in consciousness, it's a shift in perspective and pulling out to a larger purview. We have lived for generations upon generations upon generations, for thousands of years, talking about how if we do certain things, we're going to get punished. Certain things are sin, certain things, word punishment by God, by whatever, by a God, by a spirit, by whatever and whomever. And we have lived this whole existence of duality in learning that, in learning lessons through those kind of judgments, and learning lessons through that kind of perception, what I call the filter of duality. And I've talked about that in the past in my webcast, but this is like a really more pinpointed way of looking at how we change our perspective. I had a phenomenal experience a long time ago. When I started doing this Trinity work, which with it, I've learned how to open the channels into the pure Christed consciousness. And when we do that, it is coming into our ultimate power. It is erasing all of time and space. It is erasing all of the duality, because in the Christed consciousness, there is no duality. My understanding is it's all about love, unconditional love. Unconditional is the key. So when we say, if you do this, you're going to get punished, that's saying that love is conditional. That's saying that you're only going to be worthy of love if you do this or if you don't do that. And that's been great. It's been part of our existence duality. It's part of the lessons that we've learned, a part of assigning things to a me and a not me, and a right and a wrong, and a good and a bad, and all that kind of stuff. Light and dark, and all that. So when we look at things from the perspective, if we can go into the Christed consciousness and we look at things from the perspective of oneness and unconditional love, from the perspective that all of this is illusion for the lessons that we had wanted to learn, that duality is all part of that perception, part of that misperception, or just part of the illusion. It's really not either or. That we can look at things in a different light. And this is what it means when we start looking at shadow work, what we call shadow work in the metaphysical and spiritual realm. When we look at the dark side of us, because eventually we've got to do it. The first step is usually getting out of victim mode, right? And learning how to look at things from the perspective of knowing that you're responsible for all of what goes on in your life because you've signed up for all of it. There's nothing that we haven't signed up for. Nothing. That's my understanding. We have signed up for everything that we experience because we wanted to have the experience, we wanted to have the lessons. Now, many will say, a lot of times they balk when they first start getting this concept in their mind, and they say, well, what do you mean? So what, I was raped, that was my fault? I was, abused, I was whatever, I was I was hurt, you name it. So my answer to that is, well, yeah, at a certain level, we actually made agreements to have those experiences. We said, I need to be, see, the key is to rise above the ego's perception and to say, okay, let's look at this. And this is part of looking at that dark and looking at the muck. Let's look at this from the perspective of not right versus wrong or good versus bad, of saying, what was this event in my life? What was it a catalyst for? Who did I become as a result of this experience or this event? What did I end up doing as a result of this experience or event? And the key is to say, have I learned the lesson? And to have that connection with the higher self to get an accurate yes or no. And if not, you say, okay, well then I'm done. I'm done. Let's complete the lesson. Let's release any agreements that are causing me to have to experience things through this painful and punishment or suffering kind of way. Incorporate it all into my knowledge, release all the residual energy from it, and just heal it, and with love and forgiveness and gratitude on both ends, and move on. And it's funny because when we start looking at things that way and shifting our perspective just a little bit from this, I'm a victim, I'm being this and this happened to me, to saying, okay, what did I learn from this? And yeah, okay, you can say, how freaking crazy is that? Because I've done that plenty of times. Like, oh my gosh, really? Like, really? But when we can let go of it and look at things from the higher perspective, we can say, all right, this is what I learned. This is who I became. Now, I had some really painful experiences as a child, myself, personally. And my understanding is, I understand that everybody who were players in my life during that time, we all had our own agendas, right, for what we wanted to learn. And so it was all interactive and all complex and how it all panned out. And I held on to that pain from that period of my life for a long time. And I did actually have a lot of resentment. But what happened was, at some point as I grew up, I realized, I looked at that and said, you know what? Going through that has caused me to become the person I am today. I'm a much better person. I am stronger. I have a much broader perspective. I'm now able to look at all of those players in the whole play of that younger part of my life to say, you know what? I get it. I get what they were all going through. I get what their individual journeys were about and what they had on their plate, because it had nothing to do with me. How I was treated really had nothing to do with me. It had to do with what was going on with those others, as well as then what was it that I had set out to learn. And when I started looking at things from that perspective, I was able to actually have a lot of gratitude for all of the players, all of them, no matter how difficult they were, no matter how painful it was to have certain experiences back then. I was able to look at it and start saying thank you, and have gratitude and love and forgiveness and apology and everything, and appreciation for what every person, every player during that period of my life had to do with. And you know how freeing that is, because then we don't hold on to it. It's really funny. You see these things on Facebook all the time about letting go of resentment, letting go of grudges, because like holding a grudge is like somebody else having free rent in your mind. That's really what it is, because what we hold on to is our choice. The experiences are our choice. The way we experience is our choice. We can release it. We can remain fluid to it. And yes, some of them are really, really tough, and I understand that. But when we start changing our perspective, we can go through the grief, we can release the anger, we can release the resentment, and start looking at it from the lesson point of view, from the divine point of view of the higher perspective. Then it makes it so much easier to be able to look at all of those nooks and crannies. I've had many experiences through other lifetimes where I've had quite the exalted, saint-like experience, and I've had some really depraved ones. And we all have, because it's all been part of, we wanted to experience the full spectrum. And it's funny, because the depraved ones, like I was talking about earlier this week on my radio show, the depraved ones are the ones that we don't want to remember, but these are the ones that are most important for us to remember now. I have someone I've been working with who's actually incarcerated, and who went through in puberty, went through a really, really dark and what the ego would consider a terrible experience that landed her in jail for a very long time. Now, extenuating circumstances, there's issues around the sentencing and how that happened, and guess what? When I started working with this person, the perspective I got right away was, oh hell, this was brilliantly done, because this situation and lesson of standing in your power and completely losing your power and abusing power, all of that, it was something that this group of people that were all involved in this situation had repeated life after life after life. And this particular person said, you know what, I'm done. I am done. After this, we're done. We're done with this lesson. It's just, okay, we've done it to death. It's time to move on. And so therefore, when it happens, I am going to put myself in a box, literally, so I can't look at anything else. And that was like 5 years ago when this person was incarcerated. And they've done a tremendous amount of changing. At the age of 17, getting incarcerated for a really long time, and then changing and coming to themselves. And guess what? As we started working together, as this person started doing the work and looking, and we could look at, I said, you know what? There is no judgment. I have no judgment on any of this, on anything. I want to know exactly what happened, and I want to know exactly your perspective of it, because that's how we heal this. That's how we release it. And that's how we apologize and we forgive ourselves and the others involved. We cut the cords to the energy surrounding it. We let it go, we complete the lesson, and then move on. And you know what? It's funny, because as soon as that started happening, as soon as we were able to start releasing that, how tremendously this person lightened up, how tremendously this person changed, and how tremendously, guess what? Their situation started progressing into the appeal process for the term of incarceration. So that is one of, and it's so funny, because then I talk to people and I'm like, I am in such a dark place, I just don't think I can ever get out. And I'm thinking, honey, you don't know what I'm working with. I'm working with people who have hit one of the darkest pits that we could imagine as a human from the ego's perspective, and they change, and they can release it, they can look at it, they can heal it, and move on. And when we stop trying to impose judgment on them and all that kind of stuff, when they start saying, you know what, I'm done with this lesson, I completed it, I'm completing it, I'm moving on, then things start to dissolve away. So a lot of people say, well, fine, then let everybody in prison go. Let's get off of that topic. Those are semantics. Let's talk about this. If we started looking at the perspective that everyone is divine, everyone is the divine expressed as them, if we started looking at everyone as perfect as they are, in the package they are, and treating them as the divine of the highest exaltation, with love, unconditionally, guess what? The entire world would change right away. It would change instantaneously. Instead of saying, oh, well, some people are better than others, some people are bad because of this, some people are bad because of that. You know, we go to war and kill so many people, and yet then, you know, we put judgment on people in prisons. That's all perspective. It's all different truths by different people. And unconditional love, to my understanding, is the only constant in the universe. And it goes back to looking at things from that perspective. And when we do that and we start working on that kind of stuff, we start working on releasing those judgments and being able to look at this for ourselves and on others, then guess what? We start treating others with unconditional love too. We start treating the world with unconditional love. We start living and feeling in unconditional love. And then guess what? Who has to kill anymore? If I look at you as a part of me and I love you unconditionally because I know we are all the divine, we are all the divine, I can say, why would I ever hurt you? What would I ever do to hurt you? Why would I ever do that? Why would I ever have any ill intentions? When we start changing our society, changing the way we interact, to coming from that perspective, then we support each other versus take each other down. Then we unify instead of separate. And when we do that, then guess what? Then we don't need the prisons. Then we don't have the issues that are coming up, that come up because of the fact that we don't have the need to hurt each other. And yes, there is a road along the way. There is a road to that. But the first step is releasing that judgment. And I'm talking about this from that perspective, but also from the bigger perspective of looking in the mirror. And it goes back to that looking in the mirror and saying, there is everything that I have done has been perfect. It is exactly what I was supposed, that I had planned to do. Now, can I look at it with an objective point of view, with a divine point of view, and say, what was the lesson from this? What did I learn? How can I let it go? Can I see the point in everybody's journey in this? And can I give thanks and apology and forgiveness for the situation and recognize the catalyst that it was for what it needed to do? And when we start doing forgiveness, and I talk about this on the radio show, there are books like, there's a book called Radical Forgiveness I've heard is amazing, and mostly forgiveness for the self on things that have happened as well as for other people. Forgiveness goes along with releasing judgment. Apology and forgiveness. It's huge. So, step 1, look at your judgments. Look at your judgments of others as well as for yourself, and start working there. What was the catalyst? What was the lesson? Was it learned? And now it's time for me to release it. And then you can do that. And there's a bazillion different ways to do that. That's the way. And like my guest, Julie Siebert, had said on the radio show this week, it's just take action. Do something. Take one step. This is a great first step. And on that, I'm going to let you go. We'll talk to you next week. This is Angela with Living the Shift.